Imagine that, for some reason, you are conducting an excavation in your home garden. Perhaps it's for renovation, or maybe you're expanding your house. As you dig into the earth, you notice that something is not right. The first things you find are old munitions dating back to World War II. But as the excavation goes on, you come across this. This is what happened to Jutta Hohn, a German woman who was trying to build a parking lot in the front of her house in Klesen, a village near the Polish border. She never could have imagined that she would discover the remains of 8 soldiers who had fought against Stalin's Red Army. However, this story is not at all unusual, as Berlin and its surroundings are filled with fallen soldiers from battles who never received a proper burial. Today, in this new episode, we will tell you all about them. To understand this story, we must go back to the final stages of World War II. In early 1945, the Soviet Union's Red Army was just 60 kilometers from Berlin, the capital of Germany and the heart of the Third Reich. Hitler's forces were on the brink of collapse, but a final offensive was still needed to secure victory. Despite the exhaustion of the war's participants, the millions of soldiers who had died in battle were not enough. Tens of thousands more had to die for the war in Europe to come to an end. The communist troops were led by Georgy Zhukov and Vasily Chukov, while the Germans were led by General Helmuth Weidling. Since March of the last year of World War II, Berliners had been planning their defense, but they were clearly in a position of inferiority. Neither the numbers nor the resources were on their side, and, deep down, the city's inhabitants knew that a bloodbath was imminent. They had 750,000 men to fight, but the vast majority were not true war veterans but last-minute recruits. They hadn't received proper training, and it could barely be said that they were well-fed. As for their weaponry, they had 1,500 tanks, 9,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 planes. These numbers pale in comparison to the Soviets. The Red Army had 2.3 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, 40,000 artillery pieces, and 7,500 planes at their disposal. The Russian offensive began on April 16, and what followed was a true slaughter. The last-minute German recruits, mostly the elderly and minors, were unprepared to fight against experienced troops, and the differences between the two forces were immense. As you can see in the images, the capital of the Third Reich was reduced to rubble. The bombings achieved their goal, which was to cause massive material damage and leave hundreds of private homes and public buildings in ruins. In no time, the Red Army took control of Berlin. Hitler's dream of a Nazi empire lasting 1,000 years came to a tragic and bloody end. It's estimated that the defenders suffered nearly 1 million casualties in the Battle of Berlin, including 100,000 soldiers killed in action and 125,000 civilians killed as collateral damage. On the other hand, the Soviets suffered 360,000 casualties, including about 80,000 fighters killed. By May 2, after an intense day of artillery fire, the roar of war subsided. After 16 days of devastation, the communist troops emerged victorious. As soon as Berliners realized they could leave their shelters without being shot, they rushed to the streets in search of horse carcasses to feed on. The lifeless animals were dismembered and used as food. After so much hunger and misery, people were desperate to taste a bit of meat again. However, these were not the only lifeless bodies in the streets of the German capital. As is evident, the final offensive resulted in a huge number of unburied corpses that needed proper interment. Many of those who perished during the defense of Berlin did so in the village of Helby, 50 kilometers south of the capital. Today, there are 29,000 soldiers buried in the village's cemetery, many of them in unmarked graves, as they could never be identified. However, it is believed that there are tens of thousands more corpses that never received a proper burial and were left in the open where they fell. Most of them are in a pine forest on the outskirts of Halby, in an area marked with plaques in the ground so that those walking among the vegetation know where they stand. Today, there are people dedicated to searching for the remains of German and Soviet soldiers who died in combat in these places. One of them is Joachim Kozlowski, whom you can see in these images searching the forest. He lost two of his uncles in the war, so he knows better than anyone the pain of not knowing the whereabouts of a loved one. While he works independently, he is also part of the German War Graves Commission and sometimes requires the assistance of forensic teams or bomb disposal experts. After all, even though more than 70 years have passed since the end of the conflict, there are still unexploded ordnance that claims the lives of unsuspecting people who are unaware that they are stepping on a deadly trap. The following video shows the safe detonation of a German bomb in the English city of Exeter. As is clear, the remnants of World War II still linger among us. Returning to the search for the remains of fallen soldiers, Joachim explains his work in the following way. The dead have the right to rest in peace. A proper grave is something that can only be achieved in a suitable cemetery. My task is not simply to find a mass grave with 500 or 600 bodies, put a cross on top of it, and say that I have fulfilled my duty. When Joachim comes across an unidentified body in the forest, that's when his real work begins, which involves cataloging the deceased's belongings and, through analysis, discovering who they were. However, this is also the most challenging part of his work. It is easier to determine an identity when soldier identification tags, which all soldiers carry and contain a number referring to their personal file, are found. In cases where the tag has survived the test of time, it can be sent to the German Army's Information Center, where, after reviewing their old records, they can confirm the name of the individual in question. The process is completed when Joachim contacts the soldier's descendants to inform them that they finally know the whereabouts of their family member and that they will receive a proper burial. However, the search becomes more complicated when there are no tags. In these cases, which are the majority, the soldier's identity has to be reconstructed as if solving a puzzle.
Das, was wir heute festgestellt haben, das sind einige unvollständige, defekte, zerstörte, stark zersetzte Gebeine. Zum einen, das ist ein Teil des Oberarms.
Any personal item found near the corpse can reveal crucial information. Sometimes it's a wedding ring, a pair of boots, a piece of uniform, a good luck charm, or a locket with the initials of a child, a mother, or a wife. To recover the bodies, Joachim uses relatively simple equipment, consisting of a shovel and a metal detector, although sometimes he must use a mechanical excavator. The remains are buried at various depths, ranging from 50 centimeters to 15 meters. It all depends on how these people died, as it's not the same to perish from a gunshot, being crushed by a tank, or dying in an explosion. When the latter is what happened, it's easy to spot due to the bomb crater, which alters the terrain and leaves metal fragments scattered around. Joachim's work is commendable, but he is not the only one dedicated to it. In these images, you can see Erwin Kowak, who has worked for the German War Graves Commission for 40 years and is also responsible for restoring the identity of the fallen in Halby. In numerous interviews, he has provided details about his work and the challenges of his profession. For example, he claims he can determine a soldier's age by analyzing their teeth. Not only that, but he can also determine whether they were Soviet or German, as the diets in each country were different and affected dental structure. When a tooth has enamel fillings, meaning it has received treatment to repair damage caused by cavities, it's a certainty that he is dealing with the remains of a German. The reason is simple: by 1945, the Russians did not have enough materials to produce the enamel amalgam needed for this procedure. Similarly, Irwin is convinced that bones can tell stories. For example, from the upper arm bones, he can estimate the person's approximate height. On the other hand, the condition of the bone's end indicates age. Although it may seem incredible, there is something that continues to haunt him, despite decades of doing this work. One of the most chilling moments in recovering bodies is coming across the remains of children. He explains it as follows: coming across a pair of small shoes with small ankle bones affects you deeply. For men like Joachim Kozlowski and Erwin Kowalk, there is a deep moral sense in what they do. It's not just any occupation. Thanks to them, the descendants of soldiers can finally know the truth of what they suspected. Furthermore, once identified, they can finally mourn their loved one and honor them with a specific grave, knowing that their remains have been safeguarded from the passage of time. In relation to this, one of the great secrets of World War II concerns the fate of a particular person's body: Adolf Hitler. After Germany's surrender, rumors spread like wildfire. Everyone wondered if the Nazi dictator had really committed suicide, and if so, why there was no body to confirm his death. The theories about this went beyond mere speculation. If Hitler had survived, it didn't seem impossible that the Third Reich could rise from the ashes. Let's go back to May 2, 1945, the date when the terrible Battle of Berlin concluded. While the Germans feasted on dead horses, communist troops entered the bunker beneath the Chancellor's building, where Hitler spent his last days. The first to enter were the women of the Soviet Red Army Medical Corps, who proceeded to ransack Eva Braun's wardrobe. By that time, the shelter was almost deserted, with only a few people left inside. After inspecting the place for explosives, it was the turn of the Soviet Counterintelligence Unit, SMERSH, to search the area from top to bottom. By evening, they found 2 incinerated bodies in the garden of the building. Their initial assumption was that they were the Nazi leader and his wife, although it soon became clear they were mistaken. The deformed and twisted foot of one of the corpses made it evident that they were Magda and Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, known for his deformity. On May 4, SMERSH found 2 more bodies buried halfway in the crater left by a bomb. They had been burned, but the fire had only partially consumed them. The officer in charge sent them to a hospital in Berlin, where a forensic team determined that they had died after ingesting cyanide pills. This could be proven from the glass splinters stuck between their teeth. To confirm their identity, the Soviets traced Kathy Huserman, Hitler's dentist's assistant, who still had X-rays of the dictator's dental structure. This confirmed Hitler's identity and, with the help of the testimonies of the Germans remaining in the bunker, they were able to determine what happened in his final days of life. Here, you can listen to Richard Evans, one of the leading experts on Nazi history, talking about it.
On his last birthday, the 20th of April 1945, as is shown here, Hitler appeared in public a final time to review a unit of Hitler youth soldiers who had been fighting to defend the capital. Most of the leading figures in the regime now left Berlin. Hitler gave way briefly to despair, telling those who remained that everything was lost. He was going to shoot himself.
On April 30th, Hitler and Eva Braun entered his personal study, aware that they would not leave it again. It's impossible to know what their last conversation was like, but it is known that they took cyanide pills. When it began to take effect, Hitler placed a pistol against his temple and pulled the trigger. When examining the study where he committed suicide, SMERSH found bone fragments consistent with the type of wound produced by a projectile shattering a skull. However, Joseph Stalin ordered the bodies to be secretly buried in Buch, north of Berlin. By not revealing Hitler's whereabouts, he aimed to sow paranoia among Western countries, which began to view each other with suspicion, concerned that one of them might be hiding the dictator for unknown reasons. Only in 1970 did the Soviet authorities order the body to be destroyed in a funeral pyre and its ashes scattered in the Biederitz River in central Germany. Without a physical grave, there was no place where neo-Nazis could pilgrimage to pay homage. Although there are now dozens of theories about Hitler's true whereabouts, experts agree that the Führer committed suicide in his bunker, and his remains dissolved in the Biederitz River years ago. We've reached the end of the video. Leave your comment in the box below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.